So my name is Anita. I'm head of clinical leadership at Hospice UK. And Hospice UK is the charity that supports hospices across the 4 nations of the UK. And our role is to support hospices to provide very best possible care for patients and families. So specifically what I'd like to share with you today is some of the learning that's come from an analysis of hospice community volunteering, and later to share some examples in the discussion that we're going to be having later on in the workshops today. So can I just check, does it sound okay now for everybody? Yeah, great, okay. So I think the title of this session was why the importance of volunteering in end-of-life care settings. So I just wanted to start with why is it important to me personally? And just to say, you know, as a child growing up in my family, my mother spent long periods of time in hospital. So as quite a young child, I was a recipient of the generosity of neighbours and friends and the community in terms of providing that practical emotional support and companionship. And I think that at a young age was something that really stuck with me in terms of service and supporting others. I went on to do my nurse training in a very long time ago, it feels like now, 1978. And for most of my career, spent my time working in cancer services and palliative care. And I think, you know, volunteering myself, both with my local church and bereavement support group, has been a very enriching and rewarding experience. I've learnt so much from the people that I've been privileged to be able to be alongside. In 2009, I went off to, again, very privileged to take part in a palliative care study tour in India, in the state of Kerala, where I was able to experience and to work with the community volunteering team, compassionate neighbourhoods across the state of Kerala. And I think for me, that was such a humbling experience in terms of seeing the real presence, the real value and the benefit of that companionship and the skill and expertise of the people that were working, and the joy of the people who were receiving that care and support. And I think today, you know, hearing already our presentations about the correlation between that presence of being with and the impact. So something very dear to my heart. But why now? And I think, you know, this has perhaps already been alluded to, but, you know, we have this increasing number of people, and those with eagle eyes will see that this is a pre-pandemic slide, and some of the statistics have changed somewhat since the pandemic in terms of the percentages on here. But I think, you know, the message is we have this increasing number of people living into their older age, many with long-term comorbidities and conditions, and many with disabilities, and also many older people living alone. So that loneliness, the impact of loneliness on our health and well-being. And again, that increasing need for palliative care and support. And again, John alluded to that because he was talking about, you know, people and care of the dying in our services. So I'm sorry, this is a very busy slide, but I just pulled this into here because from a Hospice UK perspective, supporting the work of helping communities and supporting that capacity to care for those at the end of life, and also the importance of tackling inequalities and widening access are really key priorities for us at Hospice UK. And there are a number of projects that have been delivered over the last few years that have all, in essence, been involved volunteering, and whether that's been within our grants-funded programmes, or whether that's been within, for example, our Dying Matters campaign work. And I'm sure that some of you will have been involved in the Dying Matters campaign, and the focus of that campaign this year being in a good place being in a good place emotionally and physically. And if we think about what we've been hearing about already this morning, you know, the role of volunteers in supporting people's peace, people feeling listened to and supported. But I'm specifically going to talk about the work that was undertaken shortly in reports across hospice community services. But I just wanted to put this poster up just to share this breadth of volunteering across hospices. And this is an A to Z poster which Princess Alice Hospice put together, and just shows the many, many ways that volunteers are working and supporting in hospice inpatient units. And I think that, you know, we've been talking this morning about companionship at the end of life, but I think that if we think about everybody who's volunteering within the hospice, they have that opportunity and they are having that contact and impact to be alongside and with people. So I thought that that was just quite a nice poster. You can access that on the link that's there on the screen. So where are we now across the hospice community sector? Significant changes in volunteering, and as volunteers have become increasingly involved in the direct support and care for people with palliative and end-of-life care needs in the community alongside families and carers, and we've been hearing about that already this morning. And a case study here, and this again I think was sharing something that John was talking about earlier, was the benefits, the rewards of volunteers in terms of how this also supports people in their own journeys. And this was a gentleman called Anthony who had lost his partner and also his mother, and had gone on to volunteer at St. Joseph's Hospice. And again, he is talking there about appreciating and finding music as a common theme to support conversations. And again, you know, he says here in this case study, this is about people having living life to the full. And he's talking about playing dominoes and listening to music, which was good, you know, good for both of us, he says there. So in this context, and in the context of volunteering in the community, you know, our volunteers are more empowered and, you know, working alone, potentially with much less, less support, and it continues to grow. And the importance of understanding, one of the things that we wanted to do at Hospice UK was to understand the extent, more about the extent of how that was working across the services, the different variety of services. And if we think about the many shapes and sizes of hospices across the 4 nations, you know, we wanted to understand that a little bit more, and also to understand the benefits. So this report that I'm going to talk about was published in 2019, and it was undertaken and authored by Dr. Ros Scott, who is a research fellow at Dundee University, and also very much involved in the European Association of Palliative Care volunteering task force and cruise refit services in Scotland. So a huge amount of experience. And this was, as I say, undertaken in 2018 and published in 2019, so pre-pandemic. So the aims of this project were really to map the extent of volunteering activity in hospice organisations. And as John said, in a long history, we think about hospices being at the centre of communities and having that reach into and working in partnership with their communities, and to gather information about those services already in place, and also to think about the barriers for developing services and how we might support people who are looking to develop services. And one of the aims of this project was to create an electronic resource to support the development in this context. And it's been really lovely, and I'm so looking forward to seeing the results, John, of the training curriculum, because that's really key in terms of support, isn't it, for us developing and taking services further forwards. So this electronic resource sits on the Hospice UK website in the volunteering hub, and I have got all of the links in the presentation for you. Lots of information, lots of case studies. So just some findings there, and I think what was interesting about this was initially the response rate, with over 54% of hospices. So there are around 210 hospices that are members of Hospice UK, and over half of them did respond to this survey that was undertaken. And I think, that in itself shows the sort of involvement of an extent, and that included 6 children's hospices, and the data from that was reported and analysed separately. And again, you can see there that actually of that sample, 70% of adult hospice services had community volunteering programmes in place, and 9% had more than one such service. So many different ways in which these services are being provided. And of the 35 hospices that didn't have a community volunteering service, 21 wished to develop one. So, very much that kind of desire for it to be that partnership working. And again, the reasons already talked about today, that huge importance of volunteering. So 45% offered the support to people with palliative and end-of-life care needs. And apologies for the acronyms in this presentation, but for people with palliative and end-of-life care needs, not using hospice services. So many hospices going beyond that reach of people who are currently accessing and using their services. And that diverse range of support offered, but with that primary focus on companionship, on neighbourliness and enablement. And again, at the time this was published, all except 2 services had a range of policies in place for community volunteering. And again, there are some examples of some of those policies, and many of those you will be aware of, and I'm sure have been involved in developing. But also intending to develop these services by increasing the size and scope, and new models of support. And again, just noting there that 2 children's hospices were supporting and caring for people in the community with life-limiting, life-threatening conditions. So that, again, we can see that kind of extension from supporting people in the hospice, inpatient units, out into community with families and carers in the community. And again, I wanted to put this in because this just shows again the range of support being provided with that biggest number of support offers being very much in that space of providing emotional support, of sitting with, being with, and listening to people, and a whole range of other activities being provided. And with fewer at the bottom there around that, providing that practical support in the last days and hours, but also some people providing personal care and support as well. So a whole range of activities being reported through the survey. And the benefits, again, of which people we've been hearing about this morning, but that friendship, that improved well-being, and also people feeling that actually that also that improved access to services and better care. So joining up and having access to being able to contact those services. The benefits for family and carers, and I think we all know that the commitment of carers and families in caring and supporting their loved ones during this time, and the need for respite care. And so many of these volunteering services providing that support for carers, which, as we know, when carers are fatigued, that is often that reason why there will be that unwanted admission to a hospital setting. So huge importance of the role of volunteers in providing support to patients and families, and in particular to carers. And again, improving well-being, so that relationship with well-being. And for volunteers, again, the personal development and experience for employment is on there. And with the Hospice UK Awards this last year, the Innovation Award was awarded to St Oswald's Hospice in Newcastle. And again, during the pandemic, they took their lymphedema service out into the community. So it was supporting people in their homes. And again, they were not able to meet the demand. What they were able to do was to work with their local universities and make that offer to students who were undertaking health and care courses, who were interested to volunteer and to work alongside people in the home. Again, that was a very successful programme, which Oswald were able to take forwards. Giving that sense, and again, making that difference. Again, we've talked today about the meaning and purpose, and improving health and well-being, but also for the organisations, for the hospices, having that greater understanding of those holistic needs, and working in a stronger connection to community. Challenges emerged under 4 themes, and again, we might obviously talk about that more in the workshop this afternoon. But again, the support and how we can ensure that we have programmes in place. We've been hearing about this morning that support people and ensure that we are able to have training in place to support companions. Maintaining boundaries, and again, there's some interesting case studies on the Hospice UK website about boundaries, and also about how do we meet all the demand that we have. So getting started, there's a section in the report about getting started, about thinking about what the focus is for the approach or for the volunteering service that you might be considering. Is that working around a compassionate community approach to palliative care? Is that about empowering and working with the community to support people in palliative and end-of-life care needs, or further extending the services support that the hospices can offer, and delivering a programme? Again, there's some repetition there, but this is St Nicholas Hospice saying, we see hospice as a behaviour, not as a building. So that compassionate care, that kindness, human contact, and again, training aims. And again, this comes from the report, and it's interesting, John, listening to you talking about the further work that's happened since this was published in 2019. But that focus around actually enabling and preparing volunteers for the many situations they may encounter. And it says here, helping volunteers to build their skills and to empower them to use them as they see fit. And I think from my experience, what I've learned is that I learn so much from volunteers. So I might change that word, because I think that's very reciprocal in terms of what as professionals learn from volunteers and supporting people. And looking across the different approaches, those training components are very much focused around, and this is about community volunteering, health and safety, patient care and support, care of the dying, and self-care and personal safety, and thinking about the care and support for volunteers. And again, the whole section in the report about how do we support volunteers, is that via group support, via peer support with volunteers, and or one-to-one. And again, it's one of the key reasons that maybe volunteers may start and may not continue is not having necessarily that support in place. So I think for me the report, it provided a baseline across the hospice sector in terms of the community approaches and extent of the services, And it also highlights some of those benefits and challenges and supports getting started. There's a lot of real practical guidance in there for, for people who are thinking about establishing a service, for getting started and building confidence in the capacity for volunteering in palliative and end-of-life care services. And I think, finally, don't forget the evaluation. And it's been so great to hear about the evaluation approaches that have been shared this morning, because I think it is a particularly complex area to evaluate. And there is a section about evaluation in Ros's report, talking about, the quantitative approach, but also talking about the narrative and the triangulation of data, some of which John was talking about in relation to the European projects. So thank you very much. Thank you.